Beyond 7 o'clock, I'd like to call the Economic Development Committee to order. Tonight, we got a special night. I know a lot of people have been asking about small business, and we're very concerned about small business and big business, mostly in recovering from the economic downturn and the COVID-related issues. And we've called in the expert tonight. And first of all, Mark Egan and I've known Mark since he came to the area and headed up the Capital Region Chamber. He's been a great advocate for business, big and small, in our area. He's been a great advocate for efficiencies in government. And he is, you know, I really want to thank you, Mark, for coming in here at 7 o'clock on Labor Day, you know, the end of Labor Day week, and meeting with us here and having a conversation with us. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
And I know the members do as well. So we always have these meetings as informal, educational, and then Mark is prepared to make a little statement about the status of business in the capital region, specifically Albany County. And he also brings, we were going to have Georgette Steffens from the BID here, and she had a semi-minor accident and couldn't be here with us tonight. And you know, we will get her back here. And I know he's spoken to Jill Delaney from Discover Albany, so he's really speaking on everybody's behalf tonight. And he'll say a little, he'll give us a little spiel, and then we can open it up for questions when he's done. Fair? Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Sean. Again, good to be here. Mark Egan, President and CEO of the Capital Region Chamber, and then for the last couple of years also CEO of Center for Economic Growth. So when I first got the call asking if I'd come to a meeting, sort of the main, I think, focus, so that's sort of what some of my bullets are, we can go broader, was I think some questions relative to restaurants, was I think some of the questions that were coming from some of the legislators. And then when I saw the agenda, it also mentioned hospitality on there a little bit, so then I did touch base. So I have a few stats from Discover Albany. I won't dwell on those, but from the hospitality, from our hotels, etc. And then, you know, unfortunately, when Georgette wasn't able to come, I said to her, are there any key points you would like to make? So I'll make those on her behalf as well. So with that, I'll jump in. I'll start with the sort of the hospitality, the hotel business first, then get into restaurants, and then if you have other discussion about businesses overall, happy to talk about it. And of course, really what we're still talking about is still the after effects from the pandemic, as well as now with inflation. So again, stats from Discover Albany, year over year, so 2023 versus 2022. Really the numbers for our hotels are really, actually, it's a good story. Hotel occupancy from last year to this year is up 8.5%. Average daily rate is up 9.1%. What they would call RevPAR, which is revenue per available room, is up 13.9%. The challenge we were talking about in the hallway right now, though, is and the restaurants are having the same challenge. While their revenue is up, their costs are up. And so really their net profit isn't what it would appear to be based at looking at the numbers. But overall, as far as Discover Albany looks at it, that the hotel industry is strong in the county right now. Obviously, one of the things that you folks as legislators look at is what tax revenue also comes in. You know, the one thing that happened recently, I think you're all aware that we have 3 of our hotels that now are housing migrants, and while that helps with occupancy, no tax revenue is collected on those. So we have one hotel that's 100% migrants. They have a contract for a year, so they'll have them until next May. And that hotel alone, last year collected $107,000 in tax revenue that we won't get this year, unless for some reason it's made up somewhere else. Employment numbers in leisure and hospitality, the fourth quarter in 2019, we were at 16,370, and fourth quarter of 2022, 14,589. So we're down just under 1,800 employees in that sector. Switch gears to restaurants. And I remember years ago, I've been in the workforce for a long time, so I've dealt with other recessions. And I remember years ago, someone said to me, even in my line of work, they said, try to practice back against the wall management. I'm like, what's back? They said, what would you do if your back is against the wall? You'd do anything you had to do to make sure you could survive. And I think we know that, our restaurants were really hard hit. And so a lot of restaurants found efficiencies that they never knew they had. So how do they keep those? Many restaurants are actually reporting sales, again, very similar to levels pre-pandemic. But doesn't mean they're making money. Because when we're going to the grocery store, all their food costs have gone up a lot. Maybe their rent has gone up, the utilities have gone up, staffing has gone up by a lot, and they only can increase the price of that burger by just so much money. So it means that their profit margins, and again, a lot of our small businesses in our community, the restaurants, their margins were slim to begin with. So many of them are, still on the fragile side. Now, you probably have seen, even just this summer, several restaurants that have announced closing. And the thing I guess I would sort of say, I don't think we have any media here, right? That you recorded, okay.
Recorded.
Well,
Everything's public.
Yeah, it's public, but there's a variety of factors that often go into, just like any of us, your personal circumstances play into a situation. A lot of times a restaurant maybe has 3 partners. Well, one partner wants out. Well, the other 2 don't have the money to get someone else to go in, that restaurant closes. Something happens where they go through a divorce, and the way that whole divorce gets settled, the business falls apart. So sometimes when a business closes, even a restaurant, it's not because it couldn't be successful, it's other factors that tie in. If you look just a couple of weeks ago, you had Prime Spot, right on Pearl Street, the Bishop closed. But then, I forget if it was earlier this week or last week, is it Agua Cocina, I think it's called, which is the Mexican right on Sheridan. Well, that just reopened. They closed in the pandemic. They determined that they could come back. They thought the market was strong enough. So you have those ebb and flows. I talked about the numbers in employment with our hotels. Full service restaurant employment is down about 800 jobs right now in Albany County since the pandemic. But there's no question that without government assistance, whether it was the PPP program, whether it was the different restaurant relief programs, whether it was county and city grant programs, those literally were lifesavers. They made the difference. And I think even now, the programs that you folks are rolling out, the city's continuing to roll out, even grant programs that like the BID and others have for facade improvements, really make a difference. Some lingering impacts from the pandemic. You're all aware of it. You have some employees that don't want to go back to the office. So the remote work has nothing to do with public health. It's to do where they'd rather work from home, and employers are hesitant to force them to come back. Well, you look at it, again, if you're looking at restaurants, oftentimes those restaurants located because of where the workforce was. Yeah, whether it's here in downtown, whether it's by, British American Business Park or by Wolf Road, you name it. Well, now as those companies aren't coming back all the way, there's probably restaurants you used to go to for lunch that now they're not going for lunch anymore, just because there's not enough business for them to be able to call folks in. One of the stats I got from Georgette, and those of you who don't know Georgette, she's the executive director of the Downtown Business Improvement District. She said while 77% of the daytime employers are coming back into downtown, so they have a stat, she's saying 77%, that the average is going into work 3.5 days a week. So on any given day, that means 60% of the workforce is back, 40 is not. And then there's Street Sense, which is a company who looks at this. They estimate that 4,660 loss per worker per year compared to 2019. So again, just in downtown Albany, that on an annual basis, that impact is just shy of $14 million in lost revenue because people aren't back to the office every day. The other piece that they heard was, oftentimes the people who work in these restaurants, you know, they're not making a high wage. Oftentimes these are the folks that maybe are relying on public transportation. So this is where I give credit to both the bid as well. The bid is now into their second year. Discover Albany, you might have seen an announcement just in the last week or so, they're doing it. You know how CDTA a few years ago created that universal pass? So now anybody who works in downtown, not the office workers, but hospitality related workers, they can now come to and from work on CDTA free. And then with Discover Albany, anywhere in the county, if you're sort of a partner organization to Discover Albany, you can use the CDTA without a charge. With the bid, right now they have 40 companies that are participating and 200 individuals. The other thing that you may have noticed, that many restaurants have changed their staffing and their operational models. Again, I mentioned before, some of them are now, before they might have been open 6 days a week, now they're open 4. They're open 7, now they're open 5, whatever it might be. A lot of them, again, the back against the wall component. How are they cross-training their staff so people can perform multiple functions? You know, whether it's, you know, people who before were just waiting on people, maybe now they're actually making drinks, or folks that were in the kitchen are now, you know, sterilizing, you know, dining areas, whatever they can do to make things work. Things that happened during the pandemic. You know, a lot of restaurants didn't do a lot of takeout before. Now people want to still do takeout. You know, you know, one of the options, we don't have a lot of outdoor dining. A lot of them created it. A lot of people still want that to maintain, and luckily government has recognized that. Again, they're continuing to have a problem hiring employees. And so what they're trying to do is say, okay, where are the times of the day I can make the most amount of money? Where are the times of the day my employees can make the most amount of money? And a couple of years ago, one of our more upscale restaurants, you know, for businesses who are trying to entertain during the day, so when are you going to reopen for lunch? And he said, I don't know if we ever will. Because again, they only can hire so many people. And those employees are saying, I'd rather work at night. The average bill is more money. It's alcohol that's consumed. They get their tips. So that changes all of that. And really the last thing I want to bring up is again from Georgette, that's a little bit different than these other elements, but obviously an important one, particularly as part of the role of county government is looking at, you know, issues of public health and safety and the social well-being of our residents. She's asked me to share the number of small businesses in downtown that are challenged by aggressive panhandlers, by mental illness, drug addiction, homeless individuals. To quote Georgette, we desperately need access to your new mental health alternative crisis response pilot to be able to have it in downtown. And she advocates that if there's a way to give more pay to the open positions, she understands a lot of the positions for the unit aren't being filled just because of the wage that's being paid. And she said mental health and the drug crisis in our community is truly an economic development issue, and we need your help, end quote. So anyway, that's just a little bit of an overview. If you want me back another time to talk overall about the county and where business is doing well and growth, I'm happy to do it, but based on the scope when I first got asked, I focused in this area.
I appreciate it. You brought up some great topics that I think we can expand on. Lynn McCarthy?
I just had a clarifying question. You said something about 800 people in restaurant field. I didn't really understand.
800 less.
800 fewer, not purposefully, just more.
Right. Well, I guess that's what I'd say. It could be purposely from the perspective of most restaurants are going to have a sign that's still trying to hire people.
Right.
But the number that were employed in that sector pre-pandemic to today is 800 less.
Some have kind of refashioned themselves or reinvented themselves.
Exactly. They
So
could be
that
employed,
maybe
just not in that sector. Yeah.
kind of like that unemployment number is not always exactly reflective of what is happening.
Yeah, 100% on. Yeah.
Thanks.
Mr. Drake?
In a related topic, and we touched on it a little bit out there, a lot of what limits business growth or even sustainability is access to labor. and I don't mean necessarily like weaving labor, like labor of all kinds, right, you know, staff. You mentioned the 800 jobs, 800 fewer jobs. I think a lot of that too comes from sustainability, saying, well, we have to make it somehow, we have a little bit less business or a lot less business, we gotta do more ourselves. We can't find people to work, or we can't afford them, or both. So you get shrinkage in economic growth, because there's the model, not to digress, but thank God Gil's not here. But when you look at the island of Puerto Rico, or the territory of Puerto Rico, they devalued essentially by policy, US policy devalued work, right? And what happened was businesses started folding up and leaving because they couldn't find staff, because they were making more money on assistance than they could make working, right? It's a model that isn't applicable here, but kind of is. So in a sense, the question I'm coming to is the chamber or other groups that you know of, because I'd be interested personally, looking to find job forums to connect potential employers and employees, is that a focus at all, anywhere? Because I think it needs to be, from what I'm.
Yeah, and it happens now, and we're co-sponsors of a number of them. And now they're truly hiring fairs. People get hired right when they go. I think to a couple of your earlier points though, again, for the real small business, as you were saying, and I think back to, again, remember where things shut down quickly, and I remember it was like in the summertime, and I'm driving by like my dry cleaner, I'm thinking, just I wonder if I have something there. And I go in, and it's the summer, and I hadn't been there since early March. And I said, oh, he goes, yeah, you do. And then when I went to pay him, I gave him a big tip. And I never normally would tip. He was the owner of the place. And I just said to him, I appreciate you still here. Well, his eyes all filled up. And he talked about, trying to decide, are we going to pay the mortgage of the business? We're going to pay the mortgage of the house. Because people weren't coming in. He basically almost laid off all of his employees. He was working like ungodly hours. So when it's, when your name is attached to that mortgage, those businesses do whatever they have to make it work. But again, it's how long can they do that? Again, not to go down a rabbit hole, but one of the biggest challenges that we face in the Northeast is more challenging than the rest of the country. The whole country is, if you read any of the demographics, one of the articles I even read, they called it a demographic drought. Like the number of people who are going to retire in the next 10 years and people coming in for the next 30 years, so then you get into bigger issues. Like our organization, we're strong supporters of immigration reform. To have, the way we're going to grow our population is we have more people come from other countries who want to come here and work. But again, I know we don't want to get off.
But is there an effort being made to connect small businesses with, speaking from lived experience, you can put a job posting on Craigslist and you get nothing, right? Nothing of value. People that want to fill in their unemployment card, okay? Sorry, no media here. Or you can go on Indeed and spend your life savings and also get nothing. Is there an effort locally of which you're aware to, provide a job forum to connect people who might want to re-enter the workforce or improve their position or whatever?
Well, there is taught in a number of different areas. So it could even be, like you would use a term like re-enter. There's even programs, again, companies are looking for employees where they didn't look before. So even folks who had been, previously incarcerated, involved in the justice system, coming back, companies look and say, how do we do that? The number of companies that look and say, with our community colleges, what they're doing for certain programs, to be able to upskill those people. Again, that's different from like the restaurant business, and I think to Lynn's earlier comment, that's where some people all of a sudden said, like you think back to the beginning of the pandemic, when you leave your house every 12 days because you're just gonna go to like Price Chopper, and I felt bad for like the employees there. I'm like, look, if they're making minimum wage, 50% more, and they're subjected to all these people that at that point we didn't know if you had to wipe off your, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So some of those left those industries because they said, if this happens again, do I want to be that vulnerable? So I think that's why you saw people leave the workforce. You saw people looking, saying, what do I really want to do? And again, I think over the next several years, how do we, look, right now when you talk about artificial intelligence and what jobs are going to get eliminated for that. Now, in some cases, that we know where you have a shortage, but the issue is those jobs, how do we make sure those people are trained for other jobs? It's complicated.
Very, very big issue. Lynn,
How do you see childcare figuring into all of it? Because if there indeed are some people that want to work, and if you can find the people that want, I think also that a lot of what has happened during the pandemic is that people started caring for their own children. And they realized that sometimes they might even enjoy caring for their own children rather than working to pay somebody else to pay their children. And I know people who are very well-paid, professional people whose children have been on a waiting list for 2 years for daycare in Loudonville. So it's not, this is a pervasive problem across all strata, and I just wondered if you guys talk about that at all. And
Yeah, we
how
do.
that impacts the economics.
It's very real. And I think the difference now, though, from before, is in some cases, those are why people don't want to come back to work. It's because either they couldn't find it, or all of a sudden they were paying, $15,000 a year, whatever it was, now they don't have to. In larger metro areas, people only go to work because they had long commutes, and now they have an extra hour and a half at home a day. We don't have as much in our market. From the childcare, there's the biggest issue is there's not enough people who want to do that for a living. Because again, the pay isn't good enough. And the state has tried to create some programs for training. And again, so how do you create a sort of a pipeline for it? And there were some companies, pre-pandemic, they were looking, saying, what are they going to do to maybe help support and help bridge the gap? But again, go back to the earlier point, a lot of those companies had to then cut back on their expenses. But it's a huge issue.
Mr. Bergdorf.
Thank you. Mark, at the beginning of your presentation, you talked about the health of the hotel industry. And then it sounded like, and they came from the depths of despair
Right.
during COVID. Do you have an overall number for occupancy? What sort of like the averages across the county for occupancy?
When Georgette sent me, I probably have it, Paul. I didn't put it into my notes, so I can check and follow back.
Yeah.
Or I can have a basic report maybe sent to Sean. He can send it to the committee.
Yeah, because generally speaking, the hotel industry, for the most part, depending on the type of property you run,
Right.
You can survive at 45 or 50%, and you can be doing wonderfully at 70%. And I use those as
Yeah.
sort of broad parameters.
I don't think you can probably as much as you could years ago.
Yeah.
Some of you probably know Mike Hoffman. He used to run the old
He's
Holiday
been here
Inn.
many times.
Yeah, and I remember, back when I first moved here, which is now a long time ago, and they were building hotels, and I asked Mike, I said, do we have, you see, he knows the market. And I said, do we have too many hotels? Are we overbuilt? And I remember his line to me. And then I asked him a few years ago, and his answer was a little bit different. He said, we're not overbuilt, we're under demolished. We still have a lot of properties that we shouldn't have anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I asked him a couple of years ago, because a couple of years ago, we had a lot of hotels in Albany County.
Mm-hmm.
And then he says, now we probably are getting to the point that we're overbuilt.
Oversaturated.
Yeah, but I'll get those numbers. Paul.
Yeah, I really like it because of the, obviously I come from a community which
Right.
has a great percentage of those hotel rooms. And
Yeah.
that's a real signature of economic health.
Well, there's no better example of the investment that was made at the Desmond.
Mm-hmm.
That was obviously, you were there when we did the ribbon cutting and said that how many people, so much of their life story happened at that property.
Right.
No matter where you grew up, not just in Albany County, but in the capital region, but that was a very tired property.
Mm-hmm.
And if you talk now to either Mike Chain or Tyler Desmond, they're doing very well.
Yeah, I talked to Tyler a couple of weeks ago and he was talking about how well
Right.
it was going.
Right.
which was very interesting.
Yeah, very good. Mr. Grimm?
Thank you, Chairman Ward.
Hey, Mark.
Hey, good. Shawan, I think Ellen's on we're a subcommittee giving away money for economic development. We got $8 million to spend. And one of the things we talked about was commercial real estate. When they invented the light bulb, it killed the candle industry, and it didn't come back. Commercial real estate, it's not going to come back. Do you have any ideas for what we might do to be innovative and then use some government money if necessary to recapture the value of that space there, even knowing that the commercial space is not going to be filled?
When we talk, clarify, when we talk commercial space, we're talking mostly office.
Yeah.
Office
Yes,
space.
yep.
I guess what I'd say, just sort of, top of the thought thinking on it, Mark, is that the area in the county that had the most vacancy in office space, again, was downtown Albany. And if you look at the amount of, you call it Class A, Class B, Class C space. And downtown had a ton of C space, which meant it was never gonna get, and so if you ever looked at like CBRE, Albany used to do those market studies, and downtown always looked horrible. Well, if you look at the last study, it looks, pre-pandemic study, it looks so dramatically different, because whether it's Redburn or the other companies that have come in, and they've recaptured that. But then the issue is, I was meeting one of the law firms in downtown on Monday, and he goes, well, we have a requirement that you have to come in at least 2 days a week. And I think, only 2 days. And I said, so what, but he goes, but some don't do it. I'm like, I thought you said that's a requirement. What do I not get here? And as you know, the largest employer that we have in downtown is the state, and the state's not requiring people to come back. So I think the short answer is that we're overbuilt for a while. I still wonder long-term if some of these companies, they're gonna have employees come back more. This is, again, technically what they're saying, we're not in a recession. But, in the past, when you had a recession, it made people appreciate their job a lot more, and employers were more in charge. In the last several years, employees are in charge instead of employers. At a certain point, will employers be able to say, to do what we really need to do, we need you in every day, we need you in, like in our office, you have to come in 4 days a week. So the other piece with some of these programs, again, if, depending what you have for parameters in some communities, they've created programs where you'll do some grants towards rent for some of these businesses that are still struggling. But again, a lot of this now is really because of the pandemic. It's because of the economy right now and inflation.
So you don't think there's because you said earlier that people don't want to work in the office that much, because they got a taste of it. They got a taste of working at home. And if you're really a good worker, it's a waste of time driving into work and back.
It all depends on what the position is. Some companies can tell right away. So again, that law firm, it's billable hours. And that's what they said. They go, some people are more productive.
I was gonna say, if somebody is doing very well billable hours, I don't think they care if they're
Right.
coming in.
But then you look and say, there's other people that they look and say, in their mind, they're like, is that employee working from home, or are they a price chopper, are they doing their laundry? It's a mix of it all. But so
Billable hour, like 7 minminutes?
What's that?
In the legal life, isn't the billable hour like 7 minutes?
Right.
6, okay, so, they could be a price shopper, for 42 minutes of the hour. It doesn't really matter,
Right.
Here.
Mark, I wonder, I just talked to a really smart young guy who had some people working for him. He said it's a killer in terms of mentorship, that younger
Great point.
employees are not in the office anymore. Are you finding that, and how do we fix that?
It's a huge issue. I'll oftentimes go to our colleges, talk to graduating classes, and I remember speaking to one of the business classes this past year. I think it was at U Albany, and I said, if they're going to give you a choice of you can work hybrid, you can go to the office, or you can work from home, my recommendation is go in as much as you can go in, because most of your bosses are going to be 5 years older or younger than me. And I think the people who are going to promote are those people that they actually know. Now again, that's just my thinking. You know, so I think that part of that's lost. You know, back when the pandemic first hit, the Albany Business Review was doing tons of like free workshops online, just to have some programming of people together, and they had me serve on several of them. And I remember that there was this one company that's a technology company, and they happen to be based in downtown Schenectady. And he said, he goes, well, Mark's not gonna like what I have to say. He goes, now I realize, you know, I don't have any problem hiring people anymore, so I can hire people all over the country. So I didn't challenge him on the program, but I called him as soon as it was over, and I said, you know, you're one of those companies that gets so excited because you want to win the best places to work. I said, how are you going to do that when you have no culture within your company? Because people are scattered all over their kitchen tables or their dens or whatever. And then he, you know, and later on he said to me, you're right, but I'm still afraid because if I make them come back, they're going to leave and go to work at a different company.
Well, I will say, I have a bonus daughter, and she works at she's lives in Arizona and she started in New York in the beginning of the pandemic. She moved to Arizona. She feels very well supported. They have given up their downtown New York City, offices where they used to serve lunch and dinner and cookies and had a very cool work environment. And they still do that, but now they take that money from the rent and they fly them in 3 times a year and they have a 2-day thing together. And there are ways, I think, that some of these younger companies that are a little more pivotal, easier to pivot than older companies, are achieving some of that. And, and I wouldn't have believed it if I hadn't just seen her a couple weeks ago. And she was working the whole day. She was on the phone with her boss 5 times and, Zooming and, and I was like, oh, well, it's really not like a mystery of what you're doing all day.
But when you think about this, the rapidity of change, I can remember only a few years ago, the cool companies had the desks that went up high and like a climbing gym in the basement, and they let you bring your dog. Now, the cool companies, you don't come to work.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Certainly don't have a gym.
Your head spins that fast,
You'll catch
right?
COVID if you go to the gym.
Like, remember that though? It was all these companies like Apple and these little spin-off joints, and you came to work in your loafers and, your sandals, everyone was like, oh, isn't this
Play
kumbaya,
Frisbee.
right? And you're
Yep.
playing the ukulele.
1989, they made me play Frisbee.
So I mean, to me, the problem with that is you lose all culture too quickly, right? And how do you create a community out of purpose? And in the state, I'd like to admonish the state publicly, because you're losing community of purpose at the state. They're not having people. Someone came in and said it was something like 4 out of 5. Was it like 4 out of 5 people aren't coming in or something crazy? Anyway, it was some enormous number.
It's huge.
Yeah. And again, I'm saying, like, how do you rally behind that sort of commonality of purpose and what you're doing? And how do you know your supervisor? And by the way, how do you mentor someone who's new? It's hard to do over Zoom and on the phone.
Absolutely.
And I think we're losing that. And by the way, that's all an egalitarian viewpoint. Because if you're working at Price Chopper or you're serving culottes, you can't telecommute.
Exactly.
So working in person has become like the proletariat? Like, to me, this is crazy.
Well, again, it goes
So
back
I
to
mean,
the whole
I
sense
guess,
of-
sorry, I'm pontificating.
No, but I think it goes back to the whole piece of sort of some of the questions you asked or my earlier piece tying it in, that all these places where these restaurants are sense of community.
Yes.
So, it can be, like a little section in Green Island or Waterville Lead. It can be, Newton Plaza. It can be whatever it is. But if all of a sudden you don't have enough activity, you can't support it. I referenced before about the conversions in downtown for housing. And we've had a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing that, I'm really disappointed is so much of it happened during the pandemic. And so because I thought, like when everything was in the pipeline, I thought downtown's gonna feel so much different after all those people come. But because it happened during the pandemic and things weren't open, even though we have a lot more people living here, downtown doesn't feel any different.
We're still 12-hour downtown.
Because you had the pandemic as part of it, and you have the employees not coming back, and then you have it even where it's against some of the law firms, which, as you know, years ago, every law firm wanted to be in downtown.
Mhm.
A lot of them now are saying, okay, we're gonna have a smaller office and we're gonna have it in the suburbs instead.
Yeah.
So what do you think the trend is gonna be? Are these little our restaurant's gonna be moving into like neighborhoods like the new Scotland Avenue, all of them are still there. You know, they all made it all the way through, because they had
Right,
people
because
with
those
disposable
ones-
income who could walk over and get their takeout and take it right back home and feed their 5 kids with it.
Neighborhood restaurants are doing well.
Right, because they were based off of rooftops where people live, not where
Right.
people worked.
So I wonder if that's gonna change enough to.
And I guess going back just to, to Mark's earlier question, I don't think we're at the new normal yet. I don't think we're gonna go back to where we were, but I think over time, I'll be surprised if I think people will be back in the office more than they are today. And again, some of it might depend on the sector, because again, if you can hire from anywhere and you're afraid you're gonna lose people, then maybe it's not as much so, like to your comment, I have one of my nephews works for a company that, I don't even know where the company is headquartered, but he likes the nature and national parks, so he lives in Montana, and they're totally fine with it. Because he does it all remote, and he meets all of his goals.
I have a relative who has a very good job with a prestigious Ivy League school. It's only been there twice in 3 years that she's worked there. Mind-boggling.
It is.
But you know what's odd about that to me? Is that part of wanting to work with an Ivy League school is the culture and the
Yes,
setting.
no, I agree with that.
Like you're coming to be a part of that academia and the ivy growing up the wall,
Yeah.
whatever, like the whole thing, right?
And I met a girl on the train who, she was working in the
Sounds like a
city
movie.
and couldn't. On the train, and she couldn't afford to live in the city, and so she moved to Ohio. And so she was going back to visit her mother, so she figured that out, how she could work remotely from Ohio, because it was cheaper, and then still have the money to go take the train, to visit her mother in Brooklyn. I just thought that was like, wow, that's not something we ever fathomed growing up.
Yeah.
It was, you're gonna work where you live where you work. 20 minutes for me is my comfortable commute. I'm not doing 45, I'm not doing an hour and a half. I know this about myself, it's interesting how it's just opened up the whole world.
Well, Mark, you said something. How do you build corporate culture from home offices? And I don't think we're gonna know the long-term impacts of corporate culture building until later on, and maybe when it's too late, because that's quite an insight. How do you build corporate culture from home office?
Right, exactly. And some are doing it the way that Lynn suggested, even locally based companies, so, that, now it'd be Broadview, SevQ, they already were doing some even before the pandemic, and then the pandemic afterwards, their CEO said, we're basically gonna be almost all remote, and I'm like, again, I'm trying to challenge it, because again, I want people coming in these places, and he said, we're gonna have people come in when they need to for like team building and collaboration stuff, but not, so it is, I'm sure there's gonna be a lot of case studies done of the impacts and and there's certain things that are better, where you can do certain things more efficiently, but I still think it's hard when you miss the human touch. And then part of what all of us around this table are doing is we're trying to build a community. And how do you have a community if people are just at their laptops in their houses all the time?
Yeah, it's a broader social impact.
Right.
Well, I'm also curious about the strength of the family. Like, in the 50s, the family was strong, only one person was working, and then we moved away from that. Everybody got a car, everybody drives far. Two adults in the family work if they can, or not, or there's not 2 adults in the family. Now at the pandemic, I'm wondering if the family strength is gonna take the place of the corporate strength, and how that's gonna impact us all down the road.
Interesting.
We'll see, I guess.
Well, I think history will show you that society changes. They adapt and they change, and, for us that are used to one way of living, it seems kind of odd, but to young people, this is their normal. My relative did, she thinks that being online is the corporate culture of being an Ivy League employee, whereas we would like to be there and, see the architecture and be around the people, but that's not how they look at it.
Yes.
Very interesting.
Yes, oh, yes.
With a lot of the new apartment buildings being built down here in the city, the Huck Finn project, and then the one further down the street, that should have a positive impact on the small restaurants and go back to the culture as we knew it before the pandemic, when the city was a vibrant place. Is that,
Well, a lot of it depends on who the landlord is. So if you look at, I mentioned Redbird before, because they're the ones who've done most of these projects. If you look at almost all their buildings, their first floors are rented. And it's because they subsidize all the rent. Because again, they know, what are they trying to create? Again, they're trying to create a sense of place. And I know people want to come and they want to have a place they can go and get a burger or pick up a newspaper. And then you have the, like, I forget who was early in the comment, as far as the switch in generation of thinking. We have our longtime traditional Albany landlords, and this is what the market rate is. So they're driving the tenants out, or they have the, you know, you'll see, like, there's places on Pearl Street that have had a for lease sign for 8 years. And so I think that where it's filled, it's because the landlord is smart in realizing the way they're gonna rent the other spaces is they're gonna have amenities for those people. But if they would charge a market rate for that space, they probably wouldn't have the tenants.
Well, I look at the apartment in the market familiar with Starbuck Island. You know, they're getting a premium, they're 100% occupied. They probably have 100 people on a waiting list.
Yeah.
And they're getting market rate rents, but they're also providing a country club atmosphere. And, you know, it isn't just rich people that are there, they're young, a lot of young, college-educated people just starting out, they're living there and love it. And I love it myself, my new office is the coffee shop there. You know.
And it capitalizes on the river. It's funny because I've moved around a lot when I was in TV news, and the richest people are always on the river, or on the lake, or on some water. Not in Albany and Schenectady and Troy, there's so much industrial stuff there. There isn't a lot of and Starbucks is an exception.
But I thought, you know, I agree with you, I thought it would be, they would price a lot of people out, but a lot of young people just starting out are moving there, and they're, you know, they get a roommate, they share the cost.
Yeah.
They just love it, it's, you know, it's paradise for them.
Who wouldn't want to live in a country club?
What do we do differently?
I don't know, someday I'll be able to.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate the, yes.
Rebecca.
Oh, just an interesting. In New York City, obviously their buildings, much of it is corporate office stock. And now that it's been empty for a long time, there's been pushes to move it towards affordable housing. Have you seen anything, with mixed results because of zoning and all sorts of other things that complicate the issue? Has there been anything like that in Albany just to get buildings filled?
Well, we don't have the problem that New York has. If you look at most of our apartments, a couple of you made the reference, most of our apartments have very high occupancy, some 100%.
Yeah.
Because and that's throughout really the region. It could even be this, you know, if you look even in suburbia and Albany County and adjacent counties, the complexes are getting built. Because for a long time, we just had, either you owned a home or that was it. You know, and so we have it from that side. So we don't really need it from that component. Those of you who might live in the city of Albany, I do. You might know that the Common Council in Albany passed a local law recently that we're real concerned about, because they really raised the level of the amount of subsidized housing you have to have in each of these buildings. Well, then all of a sudden, and again, it's not like someone objects to having a percentage, but if the percentage is so high, it means that you can't financially make the project work. And, you know, for the first time in the last, 4 years, Albany actually has positive momentum, you know, in bringing new residential units to the city. We haven't had that for a long time. So I think only time will tell. Does it really halt things? Then if so, you know, I would assume the Common Council will revisit it, but then the question is, how much of the momentum is lost because of it? The other piece that I thought maybe you were going to ask, or even into your question, was, so again, if you're looking downtown, so if the first sort of significant building that was, you know, renovated, you know, they called it the Nick, you know, it's the old Knickerbocker Press building, and they track where people come from, and everyone that went into those units was from the capital region. And then I think it was when the Kenmore opened, or one of the ones on Pearl, and my numbers are probably gonna be wrong, but I wanna say it was like 30 or 40% of the people that moved in were from New York City. Because it goes back to the comment, they could work remote, if they originally were from the area, and instead of paying, you know, $3,500 a month for rent, they're gonna pay $1,800 instead, they did that. Now the challenge is gonna be, do they have the lifestyle they want in downtown? Is it vibrant enough for them to stay? And I think, you know, again, right now, the numbers are still, you know, the units are still, you know, renting very quickly.
Well, even back in, when I started in the workforce, I had friends that worked in New York City and lived up here. And they, you know, they basically made double the salary. And they did commute back and forth every 4 days or so.
Right.
So that's, you know, that's been going on for decades. But even more so now.
Right. But again, whether it's your committee or others, if you want to come back later to talk just broader
Yes.
about, you know, the overall economy, and, you know, versus right now, we got really to, you know, almost the retail economy, we could always do that, or I could even have my colleague, Katie Newcomb, who's our Chief Economic Development Officer, to join me.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Mark. Good
Mark,
job.
thank you very much.
And I'll get you the more detailed on
The hotel, that, thank you.
Yeah.
You have, no matters.
He went to Rhode Island, so I go to him and sleep there.